Piers began with what sounded like a compliment, commenting on Megan's composure and grace, but it came wrapped in sarcasm so thinly veiled that it drew a few nervous chuckles from the audience. Megan smiled politely, refusing to bite, but she could feel the trap being laid in each question. He brought up the royal split, her decision to step back, and the tension within the monarchy as if rehearsed from the harshest headlines. For every accusation, Megan responded with composure, her tone steady, her answers deliberate. But as the conversation deepened, Piers pushed harder, his questions becoming sharper, his tone louder, his intent clearer, to corner her into saying something that could be twisted and sensationalized. The tension thickened when he mentioned her mental health comments from previous interviews. Piers, well known for dismissing them in the past, smirked and said, "Some might say it was just an act to gain sympathy." The words hung in the air like smoke from a match just struck. Megan's lips tightened slightly before she answered, her voice firm, "It's not sympathy when you're surviving, it's humanity." The crowd went silent, even the crew seemed to freeze. Piers chuckled, but the laughter died quickly when Megan leaned forward and added, "You don't get to tell people how much pain they're allowed to feel." For a brief moment, it seemed she had turned the energy of the room. People started clapping softly, sensing her quiet strength. But Piers wasn't ready to lose control of the conversation he had built to dominate. He interrupted her mid-sentence, raising his voice, pressing about alleged lies, about family loyalty, about duty. "You abandoned tradition for attention," he declared. Megan took a slow breath, her calm cracking for the first time. "No, Piers," she replied, "I walked away from hypocrisy for peace." The line struck like lightning, spreading through social media in seconds as clips started trending even before the show ended. The debate turned personal when he brought up Prince Harry. Piers questioned whether Harry was being manipulated, his tone dripping with accusation. Megan's eyes darkened, her voice no longer calm but controlled fury. "Love isn't manipulation," she said, "it's the courage to protect what the world tries to destroy." For once, Piers had no words. The audience clapped again, louder this time, sensing that something rare was unfolding, not a media spectacle but a genuine confrontation of values. Still, instead of softening, he doubled down, demanding answers about private family messages and royal disputes. Megan shook her head, "That's not journalism, that's intrusion disguised as curiosity." The producers exchanged anxious glances as the live feed continued. What had begun as an interview was becoming an open battle, and it was clear who held the moral ground. Yet Piers, unable to accept that balance, raised his voice, his frustration spilling into insult. He accused her of playing the victim, of using the press she criticized for fame. Megan's composure shattered briefly as she whispered, "You talk about honesty but hide behind outrage." Her voice trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion, the weight of years of judgment pressing down all at once under the bright lights and millions of unseen eyes. As the studio grew colder with the tension, Piers leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "You're good at this," he sneered, acting the part of the misunderstood Duchess. Megan's hands clenched slightly, and for the first time, her guard dropped. "I don't need to act, Piers," she replied, "I've lived through what you only pretend to understand." A hush followed, longer than any silence before. The camera zoomed in instinctively, catching her tears forming, not of weakness, but defiance. In that instant, the audience saw her not as a celebrity or a royal, but as a woman finally exhausted from defending her truth. Then, unexpectedly, she stood up. No one moved. The host's script lay forgotten on the desk. Megan looked around the studio, then back at Piers. "If this is what you call truth, you can have it," she said softly, her tone both sad and resolute. She removed her microphone, laid it neatly on the desk, and turned to leave. The audience gasped. Piers tried to recover, calling after her, running away again, "Megan," but she didn't look back. The sound of her heels against the studio floor echoed like punctuation at the end of an unplanned statement. The cameras followed her exit, but not even the producers dared cut the feed. After she left, the studio felt hollow, drained of the artificial energy that usually powered television drama. Piers sat back, visibly shaken, trying to hide his loss of control behind forced laughter. He mumbled something about professionalism, but even he knew the narrative had flipped. The audience's applause for Meghan's stand followed her out of the studio like an anthem, and the social media world outside erupted. Within minutes, Meghan walks out began trending worldwide, followed by "Peers Exposed" and "Respect Meghan." The network's phone lines jammed with viewers demanding accountability for the host's treatment. Behind the scenes, the producers argued about damage control. Some thought they could spin it as passion and debate, others realized they had crossed a line that would live forever on the internet. Meanwhile, Meghan's publicist released a calm statement: respect should never be conditional. It was simple, but it carried the weight of everything she had endured. Reporters tried to chase her car as she left, but she stayed silent, looking out the window at the flashes of cameras that still seemed to want a piece of her pain. In the following days, clips of the confrontation dominated news cycles. Experts analyzed every word, fans defended her courage, critics struggled to justify Piers' aggression. What was meant to humiliate her became a turning point. She was invited to speak at conferences on media ethics, and several anchors publicly apologized for past remarks. Even people who had once doubted her intentions began to understand that authenticity doesn't need permission. She had not just defended herself, she had exposed an entire culture of cruelty disguised as commentary. Piers, however, faced the storm differently. His show's sponsors began pulling out, viewers sent angry messages, and his credibility as a fair interviewer was questioned everywhere. He went on the defensive, claiming he was being silenced for telling the truth, but the damage was irreversible. People were tired of arrogance masquerading as honesty. He eventually took an unplanned break, though it was clear the decision was not his. The same stage that had given him power now amplified his fall, every replay of Meghan's words reminding viewers who had really owned that moment. Meanwhile, Meghan found herself unexpectedly freed. The interview that was meant to break her instead became her closure. She continued her advocacy work, focusing on mental health, women's rights, and ethical media. In one of her later talks, she referenced the incident indirectly, saying, "Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to end the noise." The audience rose to their feet as if remembering that single walkout had said more than any argument could. Her voice, once doubted, had now become a symbol of dignity under pressure. Months later, the network quietly removed the episode from its archives, but the internet had already immortalized it. For millions, it remained the moment when truth outshone performance. Some saw it as justice, others as karma, but to Meghan, it was just peace. She didn't need to win, she needed to stop fighting. For the first time in years, she felt like her story belonged to her again, not to tabloids, not to critics, not to anyone waiting for her to stumble. Even Harry, who had initially been nervous about her agreeing to the interview, couldn't hide his pride. When he saw her walking out with her head held high, he knew she had taken back something powerful, her agency. They spent that evening away from screens, just together, silent but content. The world outside buzzed with debate, but inside, there was only calm. For once, the noise was far away. In time, people would forget the arguments and the hashtags, but not the feeling that one quiet act of defiance could change everything. Meghan's decision to leave that studio wasn't about anger, it was about self-respect. It became a lesson for anyone who had ever been shouted down, judged unfairly, or told to stay silent. That single moment, standing up and walking away, became more eloquent than 1,000 defenses ever could. And as for Piers, his legacy from that night would always be tied to hers, though not as he intended. His loudness became a symbol of everything wrong with sensationalism, while her silence became the victory that outlasted every headline. Time eventually softened the memory for most, but not for those who understood its meaning. In that brightly lit studio, amid the clash of words and egos, something rare happened. A person chose dignity over drama, truth over theater. Years later, when asked if she regretted that walkout, Meghan simply smiled and said, "No, because sometimes walking away isn't giving up, it's growing up." The interviewer nodded, understanding that those words were more than reflection, they were wisdom carved from experience. The clip went viral again,